how to write a better contract. Now, although the concepts we're going to be talking about here are in the context of writing a contract in legal context, these principles really do apply across all kinds of writing. First of all, when you're writing a contract or any kind of writing, you want to develop an outline. And when you do that outline, you're benefiting in several ways. First of all, you're presenting the material, or in this case, contract terms, you're presenting them in a logical order. Secondly, you're making sure that you don't leave out important terms, that you're including everything that you need. And then thirdly, you're making sure that you don't duplicate anything. So using that outline as the basis of your contract or whatever project it is you're writing. So very, very important. It's a good foundation. A sample outline for a contract. Choice of law provisions will usually be first, frequently be seen up front in the contract. Then we talk about contract formation, the duties of the parties, the timing of those duties. Are there any conditions to those duties? Any events that would trigger those duties? What about breach? What constitutes a breach of the contract? And then finally, if there is a breach, what are the remedies that the parties share? It's very interesting. What struck me as I prepared this is that this sample outline pretty much tracks the way the subject of contracts is presented in many textbooks. Whenever you're writing contracts, no exception to that, you want to be brief. We want to omit surplus words. Lawyers, and maybe it's contagious to paralegals, we use more words frequently than what we really need to be using. So omit surplus words. Just because you're using more words doesn't mean you're getting a better contract. And when you use too many words, you're inviting an opportunity for ambiguity, for those words to conflict with each other within the agreement. And so the whole point of a contract is that the parties know what's on each other's mind. And if you present opportunities for that to get clouded, that is not a good situation. So we want to be brief, we want to be to the point on what the expectations are of each party from each other. A single word will frequently substitute for several words. Look at these examples. And these aren't necessarily contract examples, but any kind of examples, just examples. Afford an opportunity. Well, why don't we just say to let something happen rather than afford an opportunity for something to happen? And or, you see that in a lot of legal writing, and maybe lawyers, we just can't break ourselves of using that, but or works just as well as and or. Have a tendency to. Well, why not the word tend? Or instead of saying prior to, why don't we just say before? Or a written document. What about document? I'm not sure I've ever seen an unwritten document. We want to simplify the language that we do use. We want to use clear and concise language. We don't want to use legalese. And just because we use these legal sounding words doesn't make the writing legal. It just makes it more convoluted. We want to simplify our language and get to the point. So we want to stay away from words like aforementioned, aforesaid, forthwith, party of the first part and party of the second part, hereby, herein, and etc., etc., etc. We don't want to use etc. in legal documents, in contracts. What does that mean in the context of this agreement between these two parties? So these are just some examples of what we call legalese, and we really don't need them. Now, a short story. I worked for a lawyer coming out of when I came out of law school. This lawyer had been practicing nearly 50 years, and I was at lunch with him, and I said, you know, I've seen your wills that you write for people, and it's got a bunch of herein's and herebys and beloved and things like that. You know, so we had this discussion of, you know, I was coming up in the tradition of being simple and brief and getting away from legalese. I said, why do you still write like that? And of course, you know, that's how he was trained. But he also said something very interesting. He said, my particular clients, as long as I've been around and what clients I have that are still outliving me, they don't believe it's legal unless I am using those terms. Well, it really doesn't make a difference. So let's stay away from these terms, if at all possible. We want to group similar terms together. We want to group similar terms together. So we want to make lists of things like duties or lists of remedies. For example, you know, use lists, bullets, and numbering. All right, well, this is a contract. Take a look at that. Isn't this a lot better? Use with bullets. Lists, bullets, numbering. So this is just an example that I'm using on this board. This is hard to read. This jumps out at you, and you can easily find the provisions that you're looking for and more readily interpret what you're reading. We want to use base verbs. And you depend on verbs rather than nouns, because verbs give movement and life to sentences as we write. Nouns don't. Here's what I'm getting at. We don't want to talk about collisions, about the car being involved in the collision. We want to say the car collided. We decide things rather than making decisions. We pay rather than making payments. Lessee will pay $100. That's a much stronger, clearer, more direct statement than saying, lessee will make a payment of $100. See the difference? And also, how many words did we cut off here? It's shorter, more direct, more to the point, stronger. And something closely related to that, the verbs that we do use, we want to structure our sentence in such a way that we're using active voice. Active voice. So that means replacing the verb to be, which might be is, are, was, were, those forms of to be. We want to not use those as the verb in our sentence, in our writing, but rather use very strong active verbs like run, skip, jump, notify, pay, demand, deliver, active, strong words. Examples. Here's a good example would be the trial judge ruled. To the point, 4 words. We're being brief, and we know exactly what is happening here. It is written in very strong, direct language, as opposed to the ruling was made by the trial judge. Too convoluted, it's not as powerful. So by using the active voice, we're using fewer words, and we're making statements that are strong and that are powerful. Even if you just use this strategy in your writing on exams or just reports, your writing instantly becomes so much more powerful. We also want to avoid sexist language. There's a lot of language that we use that are not gender neutral, and so we want to try to be where we can gender neutral. Reasonable man, as in the reasonable man standard, becomes the reasonable person standard. A workman No, we talk about a worker. When we do correspondence, not dear sir, but rather dear madam or sir. So we want to be sensitive to that and be more gender neutral in our writing. And then also, after we write, or as we write, we want to certainly be mindful of spelling and punctuation and grammar. And so there's some very common mistakes that people make that if you can just eliminate those common ones, the strength and credibility of your writing will immediately improve. Defendant, D-A-N-T, not defendant, D-E-N-T. Judgment, this is amazing how many people miss this one. Judgment is correct. There's no E in the middle. Judgment with an E in the middle, that's wrong. It's, I-T-S, if we are meaning the possessive of the form, because we want to stay away in our formal writing, away from the contraction, I-T apostrophe S. So we're assuming that when you're using I-T-S, you would be doing it in the context of a possessive word. No apostrophe over here, it's, which stands for it is. But this is a very, unfortunately, too common mistake for when people are trying to do writing. Regardless is a word. Irregardless is not a word, so don't use it. Could have is a phrase. Could of is not. So these are just some examples of common mistakes that people will make that bring the perception of good writing down several notches in other people's eyes. So if you follow all of these and the tips on the previous boards, you're going to be a stronger writer.